Welcome to the CLIMAX Academy Live. I'm Jim Miller, the Global Training Manager. CLIMAX has always been about clever machining, welding, valve testing, solutions, and technical support. This video series we're doing give people an overview of our equipment and how it works. Today we're going to be covering the PL2, and at future videos we'll be adding other equipment. So if you have any questions during the presentation that we have, the video we have, go ahead and submit those at Zoom Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those at the end after the video plays. And if you have any suggestions for other machines you'd really like to see, go ahead and submit those as well. So as always, let's talk about safety first. We always want to do a risk assessment of the area that we're going to work in. We want to be really careful about any hazards that we might come in contact with, any job site regulations that we might have to accommodate. We want to carefully look around, make sure there's nothing between us and the equipment that we're going to trip over. We want to watch out for cords, any kind of loose materials that are hanging around, anything that would be a hazard to ourselves. And we always want to make sure that now that we're more into the equipment demonstrations, we want to make sure that we always remove the power source anytime we're reaching into the machine to make any kind of adjustments. So if I'm adding a tool bit, if I'm making a give adjustment, even if I'm adjusting the feed, I want to go ahead and disengage power, make that adjustment, and then re-engage power. So just want to be real safe anytime we operate a portable machine tool, because it's out there on site. We also want to watch out for any sharp objects, chips, tool bits, any kind of pinch points where the machine might rotate around a tight area. We want to watch out for that. So once we're comfortable with our surroundings and we're comfortable that we've tried to mitigate any of the hazards that we might have to work around, we're ready to go ahead and get started. So again, while this video is playing, feel free to submit any questions you have to the Zoom Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to those after the video plays. So enjoy. Hi, my name is Jim Miller. I'm the Global Training Manager at CLIMAX Portable Machine Tools. Today we're going to talk about the PL2 Portable Lathe. So let's do a component recognition first. First we have our power source. In this case we have an electric motor. We have the main body of the machine, the carrier for the turning arm, and the counterweight. We also have a tool head. In this case, on the end of the spindle for the machine, we have a single bolt adapter. And what that allows me to do is have a male boss on the end of this single bolt adapter that allows me to adjust the machine independently of that single bolt adapter. And then we have the workpiece that we're going to be cutting today. In continuation of our component recognition, let's talk about the tools that I'm going to be using today. So I have the crank handle that allows me to manually move the tool arm in and out. I have a universal kit here that I like to use. It's an inter-rapid indicator. It's a test indicator that gives me the ability to travel 60 thousandths in either direction, and I can attach it right to this universal stand in a couple of different ways. It'll slide into the dovetail, or I can mount it into the rod. There's a lot of different ways, and then this will bend around any direction that I need it to. And you'll see me using this when I dial in the machine, as well as if I want to make an adjustment to the machine. It comes with a 9/16 wrench that allows me to attach the machine, tool bit. Also, this is another style of indicator that has a magnetic back. So oftentimes I'll put this right on the turning arm, and that'll give me the ability to set my feed rate. And I can also use this with an adapter, a magnetic backed adapter that allows me to set my depth of cut, or I can also just use the dial that's part of the tool head. And then also a set of imperial or inch Allen keys that goes from 3/8 down to 50 thousandths. So you'll also see me using these in this video as well. Let's talk about operation of the machine. First we'll start with the motor, and there are other motor options as well, but this one you can lock the RPM on and then adjust
the RPM by turning the rheostat. Next, we'll talk about the operation of the turning arm. So I have the ability to shift, engage or disengage the rack into the clutch up on top. So that's engaged, that's disengaged. When it's disengaged, I can feed either direction. When it's engaged, I can only feed the direction that the clutch. This machine only feeds one direction. It only feeds in the from the machine away. So disengage, I can back up. Engage, I can only go. This also leads us to, I have the ability with these four adjustment screws to adjust for taper, and these four screws attach the turning arm assembly to the main body. And this knob right here is my feed adjust knob. Next, we'll talk about the optional single bolt adapter. The end of the spindle is drilled and tapped so that four screws clamp the spindle to the single bolt adapter. Four screws push against the single bolt adapter, and that's what gives me the ability to adjust for perpendicularity. Also, there's four screws radially around the spindle, and that's what gives me the ability to adjust for concentricity. I'm going to demonstrate my method, the safe method, for setting my feed rate. So what I prefer to do is remove the motor. Now that I've removed the motor, I can easily rotate the machine by hand and not worry about the power source influencing or accidentally taking off and hurting me or getting me caught in the machine. So I'm going to place the dial indicator that I showed you earlier. We're going to magnetically mount that right to the turning arm, and I'm going to adjust this to a 0 setting. So when I rotate the machine without the feed engaged, there's no movement on the dial. When I engage the feed and rotate the machine, I get the amount of feed rate that I'm going to get in an advancement every time the machine rotates. So with this setting, I'm not getting any feed rate, so I can open up the dial until I get the amount of feed rate on the dial that I want to see per revolution based on the finish that I want to obtain on the turning of the shaft. So now that I've got my feed rate set, I want about 4 thousandths per revolution to get the finish that I want to get on this shaft. Perfectly set. So next, that brings us to the tool head. Now you'll notice that the tool head uses round tooling, 1/2 inch round tooling. And also the tool head has a built-in dial that allows me to make an accurate radial adjustment. Also, as part of the tool head, I'll show you the ability to put the tool bit in. And also, if you'll notice the tool geometry with a round tool bit, I kind of want to set that tool geometry and make sure that my interleaf angle is not negative. I want to be able to make sure that I still have the appropriate tool geometry to actually cut the material. And then I can just lock that tool bit down in that position. Another feature that I'd like to talk about is this slide is on a dovetail. And it has 3 set screws that tension that dove. We plugged the end ones because they're preset to set the amount of tension, and then the center one is used for a lock. So that's the way that when I set my diameter where I want it, then I can lock that set screw and be at the radial adjustment so that it won't drift as I cut.
Okay, so now that we've watched the video, this will be our question and answer time. So it looks like John's received a couple questions here. Go ahead and let me let me hear what you had there, John.
What are the power options for the PL2000?
Yeah, so the power options, we have two different electric motors. Like you'll notice in the video, I had a fine motor, the orange colored outside motor. Those are still around and we're still using those. We also have the Ibenstock, which is this this motor that's with this, and most of the rental machines would have this Ibenstock motor. And then we have a pneumatic motor. So pneumatic and electric are the two power options.
Do I need the single bolt adapter?
Yeah, that's a great question. The single bolt adapter is an option. It's not necessary, but it makes life so much easier because what it has a male boss on the end of it, and it allows me to use the feature of the jacking screws for centering. And it also allows me to have a good hard surface to push against, because what I'm doing is I've got the end of the spindle mounted on the end of that single bolt adapter, and I'm pushing against it as well as pulling against it. And that's how I have my perpendicularity adjustment. And so the outer set screws allow me to center, and the face adjust screws allow me to push away. So it does make life much easier to have that single bolt adapter, but it is not necessary to operate the machine. Great question.
What is the best process for centering the machine?
Okay, good. Yeah, we didn't really walk through that too much in the video. So what I like to do is I like to disassemble the machine, meaning I take off the top slide, I take off the counterweight, and I take off the electric motor. That way I'm just holding the main rotational drive and the gear reduction. So what I do is I'll hold that up, tighten it onto the adapter, and then I'll reassemble the machine once it's on the shaft. That way I'm not having to handle the machine. So then the first thing I do is I center. I put an indicator in the spindle and I center at the very end of the shaft. And then once I'm centered, I extend the tool arm out with an indicator on the very end. And I'm still centering technically because I'm looking at the indicator that goes up and down, but I'm adjusting perpendicularity. I'm using that push-pull at the end of the shaft to adjust that perpendicularity. And then once I've got that end of the shaft dialed in, I'll come back and recheck the front, because anytime I make that kind of a movement, I've got to go back and forth and make sure that both readings are zero. And then once that's done, then I'm ready to go. So great question.
Are the portable lathes available for rent?
Yes, actually the video that we took, that machine was our training machine, and somebody had to have it right away, so we sold it. And this is a rental machine. They were kind enough to send these, but these don't stay around long. This is a very popular machine. So if you're going to rent one, you have to be on the ball to get it when you need it. But yes, we do rent.
Can the PL2000 cut a taper?
Yeah, it's really designed to cut a straight OD. It has the ability to adjust around that perfect alignment. In other words, I can measure the front and the back and have the same exact reading. Now, sometimes due to tool pressure, due to how far I'm extending the arm, I need to make an adjustment on the taper. And like I said in the video, it has 4 screws outside the clamping screws that allow me to put pressure against this top slide. And that allows me to adjust that taper. But I couldn't do a very big taper. It's only going to be just to adjust it for perfect alignment. Now the PL4 has the ability to set the taper, and that can go up to 4 degrees, I believe, or 6 degrees. It allows me to set the arm at the angle that I need, and then I can actually turn that taper. But this machine's not designed to cut a very steep taper. It's only designed to take the taper out.
If we need to work on a slightly longer shaft, Can we order an extended shaft to reach further?
Yeah, with the PL2, no. Now, I have had customers saying that. I have had customers to build their own extension, but we really can't guarantee the accuracy of the machine if you do that. The larger machines do have a standard range, and then they have an extension range. But the PL2, no. The PL3, yes, does have an extended option, and the PL4 has an extended option. But PL2 is really, you're kind of stretching the distance from the end of the spindle. 12 inches is quite a long reach. Even with this big square tool arm, you're going to get some deflection. And you're creating a lot of tool pressure. Tool pressure is the amount of force it takes to hold that tool bit against that workpiece. The harder the workpiece becomes, the more tool pressure it takes to hold the tool against it. So yeah, this machine, I would say, I don't really recommend it. If you have to go further, step up to the next size machine.
What is the process to assemble the spacers to extend the working range and diameter?
Yeah, okay, so basically when I described how I set the machine up by taking the top slide off and taking the counterweight off, it's the same process when adding the spacer. The spacer is basically just an extension that goes under the top slide, between the top slide and the main body, and it's just a 2-inch block that has a push rod in it. The feed mechanism works similar to a push rod in a car, where it extends the valves, open and close the valves. That's how the feed mechanism operates. As the body rotates, it takes that motion and turns it into a feed advancement. So by extending the top slide out further, I also have to add weight to the counterweight or it won't be balanced. So by adding the 2-inch spacer, I have to add a bigger counterweight as well, where it won't have enough weight to be perfectly balanced as it rotates around the shaft. Hopefully that answers your question.
Are there other mounting options other than the single bolt adapter?
Really, I always say that portable tools are only limited by your creative ability to attach the tool to it. The bottom line is either you can use a single bolt to adapt to the end of the shaft, you can use a 4-bolt pattern that's the end of the spindle, or you can make any kind of adapter you want to mount the machine to the shaft. I've seen people do an ID chuck and mount it to a pipe and be able to do the OD of a pipe or the end prep on a pipe. You're only limited by your creativity when it comes to mounting. Now, some mounting is better than others. That said, you're gonna want to make sure that it's good and rigid and well grounded to that workpiece. But yeah, no, as far as we offer CLIMAX, we offer 2 options: mount the machine directly to the shaft or mount the single bolt. But as far as what you do with it, there's a lot of ways.
Is there a big difference in machining between the electric or pneumatic?
Well, not really. I mean, you're still going through the same reduction. You're still going through the same bearings. So the relationship between the power source and the workpiece is the same. Now, as far as power goes, if you have an air compressor that doesn't quite have the volume that you'd like, you could have diminished RPM or diminished horsepower. But generally, electric is going to give you a very constant. Now, any DC electric motor is going to draw down with load. So in other words, I could set the RPM with a tach before I start, and then once I get into a cut, that RPM is going to be reduced because of the load. That's just standard with any kind of electric motor. Pneumatic motor is going to do the same. I'm going to have to increase the volume of either electricity that goes into it or air that goes into it to maintain a volume when it's under load versus when it's not. So I think that answers your question. There's going to be a drawdown no matter what kind of power source you have, and that's going to be standard pretty much any machine you use.
Does CLIMAX make an adapter for IV turning and boring?
No, not with the PL. Well, okay, that being said, if I have a shaft that's internal to a diameter, then I could mount the machine on the shaft and reach between the shaft and the ID and turn the tool over, but I'm going to be limited to a very small diameter. And we have had customers do that have a shaft within inside of a housing and they need to recut the ID of that housing. So technically, yeah, it could work inside of a diameter, but really it's designed to turn a shaft or a pin to do the OD. But like I said, you're only limited by your creativity as to how you can use the machine.
It appears that the tool head is tilted back and not straight up and down. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Good catch there. So if you have a shaft, a round shaft, and I have a tool bit that's 1/2 inch diameter, if I have it directly above the shaft, I'm 1/4 inch ahead of center. And if you've ever ran a lathe, you know you don't want your tool ahead of center or above center because that changes your tool geometry. So if I tip the tool head back at 3 degrees, that's the angle, it puts the cutting edge directly on center line. Now, that being said, the smaller the shaft gets, the further behind center it becomes, but that's okay. I can be below center, even on my lathe, because my geometry still accommodates for the cutting edge to be the only edge that sees the material. But as soon as I get that cutting edge over center, higher than center, or ahead of center, then I run into problems with my clearances. So that's a great call to notice that. But the smaller the shaft gets, the more you'll notice how much further it is behind center. But the maximum shaft that this can turn, it puts it exactly on center. So that's why it's tipped back like that. That is on purpose.
How large of a diameter can you cut with the single bolt adapter?
Well, it's only limited by the range of the machine. So the single bolt adapter is just a way to mount the machine to the shaft. I believe the biggest shaft that this machine can turn is 9 inches with the extension. That would be the maximum, regardless of how you mount it. Where it becomes an issue is when the shaft is smaller than the single bolt adapter. And that's why we provide a plunging tool, one that you can plunge straight down and cut a groove, and then have the turning tool to turn the shaft. That's really more the issue when the shaft is smaller than the single bolt or smaller than the spindle.
Can you cut threads with the PL2000?
No, it's a clutch feed. So it actuates by a certain amount of advancement every time the machine rotates, and I can affect how much it advances. So I can have a quite aggressive feed rate, but a lathe that threads has to have a half nut that actually follows the lead of a pitch or a screw. And that's the only way that you can repeatedly cut a thread is by engaging a half nut into a thread or a gearing that aligns with a pitch, tying the rotation to the advancement every time it turns. Exactly. A clutch is a pressure mechanism that it advances on pressure, and it's not accurate enough to repeatedly cut a thread. So that answer would be no on a PL. None of our PLs are designed with a gearing that allows you to thread.
How heavy is the machine? Does it require rigging to install it?
Again, my preference is to disassemble the machine, and so I can assemble this by hand. I don't think any component on it weighs more than about 35, 40 pounds alone. And so I wouldn't want to have to hold it up by itself and mount it without disassembling it. That's probably, I would guess, at this configuration in the 75, 80 pound range. So more than one person would want to manage. But if you break it down, it's not bad. And I assembled this myself without a crane, but I break it down into components.
Does CLIMAX offer a mid-shaft turning lathe?
Not as a standard. We have designed and built mid-shaft turning machines. but we don't offer one as a standard. That would be, you'd have to make a request through your sales manager to have one designed specifically for your needs.
What is the most common application you have seen for the PL2000?
Probably motor shafts, like big fan motors, big electric motors. The shaft or the coupling goes bad and it galls the shaft. Majority, maybe a pump. But I would say the majority are big electric motors. My preferred fix is to reduce the diameter and put a hardened sleeve on the shaft. I typically will ask people to avoid welding a shaft because once you've welded, it's very difficult to get that concentric with the bearings that are in the motor or in the pump. So my preferred method is to turn the shaft smaller and put a hardened sleeve on it, or go to the next size bearing smaller. But yeah, that's probably the number one, pumps and motors.
Can the lathe work on a tapered shaft?
Well, as I mentioned, the larger PL4 is capable of working on a tapered shaft, but the PL2 is designed only to cut a straight diameter. Okay, well, that's great. I really appreciate all the questions, and hopefully we've learned something here and we've sparked some interest in the PL2. Again, submit those questions to us through askcpmt@cpmt.com for future equipment, or maybe a little more in depth on certain things that you're really concerned about, or have interest in. So never stop being curious, and we look forward to you joining us next time. Thanks a lot.